I, like you, am a self-taught woodworker who has learned a ton from YouTube. But I've noticed as I've been doing this more and more, and actually been doing it professionally for a little while here, that there are a lot of tips out there on YouTube that aren't really tips. And so I wanted to share with you some of those things that you don't actually want to do in your own shop. And the first one has to do with sanding. So I know you've seen it. A YouTuber is out there just blabbing away in their video, saying, like this video, subscribe for more content, whatever it is that they do. And then they say, you know what might convince you? I have a helpful tip. You take a pencil, you take your board, and you scribble all over it so that you know where you've sanded and where you still need to sand. And that is baloney. Do not do it. Not only is it unnecessary, it's also a pretty bad tip because it's going to cause you more work and you're going to actually spend a little bit more time sanding than you would if you didn't do this at all. See, the problem is wood isn't flat, and this oak here has these grooves. They're called pores. And the problem is you can see as I make this pencil line, it dips down into those pores, which pushes lead down into them. And it's pretty darn difficult to sand it out. You have to get way below where you would have to sand to otherwise. So what you want to do instead, if you have trouble keeping track of where you've sanded and where you haven't sanded, get a light. Now, I'm not talking about more overhead lighting, although that does help for a lot of things. What I'm talking about is a raking light that you can put next to your workpiece to shine across it. Now, this is great to identify any defects or scratches along the way as you're sanding, so you can sand those areas a little bit more, but it is also great for recognizing where you've sanded and where you didn't. Here you can see as I'm sanding, you leave this white trail behind. That's just a little bit of sawdust that you're leaving behind. And you can see as you're going, you're expanding that white area all the way across the board. Now, once all of the dark areas are gone, you can come back, wipe the whole thing down, it'll turn it dark again, and then you can up your grit and do the board over again. To me, that's a way better solution because you get the added benefit of being able to identify any of those areas where you have a ding, or maybe you're sanding too fast and you're leaving swirl marks. With the light, you're going to be able to see that. The pencil mark doesn't do anything for you. It's only a negative, so get rid of it. All right, so this next one, I am very guilty of. I worry too much about the joinery. And it's partially because that's what I like. I like to make cool joinery. I like to make sure that my pieces fit together really nicely and that I get good, strong connections that are gonna last for a very, very long time. Outlive me, hopefully. But if your goal is just to make furniture, then just use screws. Now, I know what you're thinking, but screws don't look good, Keaton. Well, then hide them with one of these. This is a countersink bit. It has two parts. It has the pilot bit that's going to drill for the shaft of the screw, and then it has this part that's going to drill to recess the head. Now, you can recess it a little bit so that the head sits flush, or it has a longer piece so you can recess it further down into the wood and you can hide the screw completely. What's cool about that is these are sized for a 3/8" dowel, so go pick up some of those. You can then put the dowels in, glue those in place after you've screwed all your parts together, and you can use the same color wood or contrasting wood to give a really cool effect and make it look like you did joinery, even though you didn't. So if your ultimate goal is to make furniture, do it quickly, you don't really care so much about the joinery, more about the piece as a whole, then use some screws, use one of these countersink bits, and get your project done even faster. So this next one isn't really a tip that people give you that's wrong. It's more something that no one talks about. And if you like joinery, then you're going to need to do this. And that is make test cuts. And the reason why I typically don't show it during a build video is because it's kind of boring to watch someone just tinker with a fence and move it around a little bit at a time until you get it just right. But it's something that I do on every single project and frankly on most cuts, especially the critical ones that have to do with joinery. In every single project, what I like to do is when I'm milling, I make sure that I mill parts extra long. And what that allows me to do is one, avoid defects like this knot in this leg, and two, It gives me the exact dimension excess material that I need so I can make some test cuts in my parts of the exact right size that my work pieces are going to be. And if I screw things up, then I have more opportunities to get it right rather than going straight to the workpiece. This is something I do on every project. This was my last table build where I had some complex mortises that I needed to make in the legs with a compound angled mortise. And my router table setup was a little bit tricky, so I dialed it in with some test blocks. So keeping with the theme of don't do this, instead do that, well, don't make your offcuts so small that you have nothing to work with after you're done with them. I always plan my parts to be quite a bit bigger than they need to be. And then I know that I'm going to trim off some and I'm going to have this just in case. I then go through after the project's all over. I keep everything from that project just in case I need it. And then when I'm done, take all the little pieces, throw it in the fire bin, and take the bigger pieces like these and put them in my save pile because I have a problem with hoarding wood. And unfortunately, I have no suggestions on how you can fix that. And my fourth tip has to do with putting a solid wood top onto a base of some sort. And a lot of times you'll see people using these threaded inserts with some type of bolt. And these are helpful to have. That's why I have some in some very specific circumstances. But for the most part, they're completely overkill. I'd say 95, 99% of what you make, you don't need to use these. You are fine with just using some screws. So when you're connecting a tabletop to a base, the thing that you have to worry about is wood movement. That tabletop is going to expand and contract with seasonal wood movement as humidity goes up or it goes down. And that's why you want to use a pan head screw like this, because you can create a bigger hole than the shaft of the screw. So as that tabletop expands and it moves a little bit, it allows for a little bit of wiggle room, and the pan head sits inside of its recess in that stretcher, and it helps keep it in place still and keep everything nice and tight. A furniture bolt going into a threaded insert works the exact same way. A bigger hole and the bolt moves back and forth. Functionally, they're identical. The way that you're accounting for the wood movement is in the apron itself and not in the fastener that you're using. So it's not for a wood movement thing. It's not any better or any worse. There is only one reason why you're going to use a threaded insert and a bolt over a screw. And that reason is the reason why you typically see people on YouTube using them. It's because they're shipping these items and they need to be taken apart and put back together multiple times. If you're shipping something really large, it's a lot easier and cheaper to be able to take it apart, make the pieces a little bit smaller, be able to put them on a pallet or something like that. It's more cost effective that way. But if you're not shipping your items, then there's really no need to account for this. If you're really just taking it from your shop inside your house, then your screw is not going to need to come out and it's going to be totally fine. And even if you do need to take off a leg, well, if you're only doing it one time or a couple of times, the screw threads aren't going to get messed up inside that piece of wood. It's going to work just fine for a few times taking it apart. So if you're planning on how to attach your base to your tabletop and you're thinking about threaded inserts, first think how many times you're going to move that. Is it just from the garage inside of the house? Are you even going to take it apart, or are you just going to carry it in as one solid piece? And if so, just use screws. Personally, it's my preferred method for attaching a tabletop to a base. In my next tip has to do with flattening the surface of boards with your planer using the planer sled. And trust me, YouTubers have been telling you to do it wrong for years. But I already made a full video on that topic, so I'm not going to dive into it in this video. Instead, you can check out this link right here and watch the whole thing for yourself. But that was my last tip. So hopefully you learned something that's going to save you time in your shop on your next project.